Colorado Territory, 1870. The late autumn wind whipped across the valley, carrying the scent of snow and desperation as Nora Taylor trudged up the muddy path toward Everett Blackwell's ranch. Her threadbare coat offered little protection against the biting cold, and her stomach twisted with hunger pangs that had become her constant companion. 3 days without a proper meal had driven her to this last desperate act, seeking work from the most formidable rancher in Clear Creek County. The sprawling rocking spread appeared before her as she crested the hill, its sturdy main house and outbuildings a testament to prosperity that seemed to mock her current state. Nora clutched her small bundle of possessions tighter and squared her shoulders. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, promising warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. Since her father's passing, leaving nothing but debts and bitter memories, Nora had exhausted every option in the nearby town of Silverton. No one would hire a woman of 22 without references or family connections, especially not with winter approaching. As she approached the front porch, a large dog with mottled brown fur rose from its resting place, fixing her with wary eyes and a low growl. "Hush now, Rusty," came a deep voice from the doorway. Nora turned to see a man filling the frame, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples fell across his forehead, partially obscuring eyes the color of a summer storm. Everett Blackwell. Everyone in 3 counties knew of him. Widowed young, built his ranch from nothing, kept to himself except for business. Stories about his gruff demeanor circulated through town like currency. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've come about work." He assessed her with a penetrating gaze that seemed to take in her worn boots, faded dress, and the proud tilt of her chin despite it all. "Not hiring," he said flatly. Desperation gave her courage. "Please, sir. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm stronger than I look and I learn quickly." Her stomach chose that moment to betray her with an audible growl. His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Town's got charitable societies for women in your situation." "I don't want charity," Nora replied, her back straightening. "I want honest work. I'll do anything. Tend your garden, help with the animals." The words caught in her throat, pride wrestling with necessity before surrendering completely. "I'll work just for food and a corner to sleep in until spring." Everett Blackwell's jaw tightened as he studied her, and for a moment, Nora feared he would send her away. Then his gaze shifted to the darkening sky and the first fat snowflakes beginning to fall. "Come in," he said gruffly, stepping aside. "Storm's coming." Relief flooded through her as she stepped into the warmth of the ranch house. The interior surprised her, not the sparse bachelor quarters she'd expected, but a home with sturdy furniture, braided rugs, and a crackling fire in the stone hearth. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning," she admitted, though it had been little more than a crust of bread. Without comment, he moved to the kitchen and returned minutes later with a bowl of stew and thick slice of bread. Nora fought to maintain her dignity by not snatching it from his hands, but once the bowl was before her, she couldn't help devouring it with unladylike haste. Everett sat across from her, silent as she ate. When she finally slowed, he spoke. "You're Thomas Taylor's daughter." It wasn't a question. Nora nodded, tensing. "You knew my father?" "Knew of him." His tone revealed nothing of his thoughts on the matter. "Then you know I have nothing," she said quietly. "The bank took everything when he died. But I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Blackwell. I'm asking for a chance to earn my keep." He leaned back in his chair, those storm cloud eyes assessing her. "Ranch work is hard, Miss Taylor, especially in winter." "I'm not afraid of hard work." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, I don't imagine you are." He was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again. "I've got a housekeeper who comes 3 days a week from town. Don't need another." Nora's heart sank, but before she could speak, he continued. "Could use help with the spring lambing, though, and someone to tend the kitchen garden when the weather turns. Ranch hands don't stay through winter. Just me and my foreman, Hank Bennett. Too quiet for most." "I don't mind quiet," she said, hope flickering to life. 3 months trial," he said finally. "Food, lodging, and $5 a month. If it works out, we'll discuss terms for spring." It was more than she dared hope for. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I won't disappoint you. Everett, he corrected, rising from his chair. If you're staying here, it's Everett. Come on. I'll show you where you'll sleep. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The first week tested every ounce of Nora's determination. Her body, unused to the physical demands of ranch life, protested with aching muscles and blistered hands. But she refused to complain, rising before dawn each day to help prepare breakfast before tackling whatever tasks Everett or Hank assigned her. Hank Bennett, a leathery man in his 50s with a perpetually squinting left eye, initially regarded her with suspicion. Never had a woman working the ranch proper, he'd muttered on her first morning. But by the end of the second week, after she'd helped him repair a broken stall door and shown unexpected skill with the more skittish horses, his gruff manner had softened. Girls got grit. She overheard him telling Everett one evening as they sat on the porch. Might make it through winter after all. Everett's response was too low for her to hear, but she took pride in earning even that small measure of approval. The ranch house itself became Nora's domain. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper who came from town, was a pinch-faced woman who made no effort to hide her disapproval of Nora's presence. Young unmarried woman living with 2 men, she sniffed during her first visit after Nora's arrival. People will talk. Let them. Everett had replied with such finality that Mrs. Finch didn't raise the subject again, at least not in his hearing. When December arrived with its shortened days and long, cold nights, Nora found unexpected comfort in the routine that had developed. Mornings were for household tasks, cooking hearty breakfasts, baking bread, mending clothes. Afternoons might find her helping in the barn, learning to care for the winter livestock, or preserving the last of the root cellar's bounty. Evenings were the greatest surprise. Rather than retreating to his study as she'd initially expected, Everett often remained in the main room after supper, sometimes reading by lamplight, other times working on ranch accounts while Nora darned socks or worked on a quilt she'd begun piecing together from fabric scraps Mrs. Finch had been about to discard. They spoke little at first, but the silence was companionable rather than strained. Gradually, conversation emerged, initially about ranch matters, then expanding to books. He had a surprisingly extensive library, the history of the territory, and eventually, personal histories. Why did you never remarry? Nora asked one evening in early December, the question slipping out before she could consider its propriety. She flushed immediately. I'm sorry, that was terribly forward of me. Everett looked up from his book, but rather than the offense she expected, his expression held only thoughtfulness. Never found the right reason, I suppose, he said after a moment. Some marry for convenience, others for social standing. Neither appealed to me. He turned a page, then added quietly, and some marry for love, but that's rare enough to be nearly mythical out here. You don't believe in love? She asked, curious despite herself. Didn't say that. The firelight caught the silver in his hair as he looked up at her. Just said it's rare, especially the kind worth building a life around. Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster, and she quickly returned her attention to her sewing. My father used to say marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. It was why he never remarried after my mother died. And what do you think, Nora? The sound of her name in his deep voice still sent an unexpected warmth through her. I think, she began carefully, that marriage should be a partnership, equal in respect, if not always in contribution. When she dared look up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. A sensible view, he said finally, rare in a young woman. I've had little opportunity to be frivolous, she replied with a small smile. No, he agreed, his voice softening. I don't imagine you have. As December deepened into January, bringing with it the harshest weather of the season, Nora found herself increasingly aware of Everett in ways that extended beyond their employer-employee relationship. She noticed the strength in his hands as he worked with the animals, the rare but transformative nature of his smile, the kindness he showed to even the most troublesome of the ranch's creatures. Most of all, she noticed how he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't see, a mixture of admiration and something deeper that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks warm. You're heading for trouble, girl, she whispered to herself one night as she prepared for bed. A woman in her position couldn't afford romantic notions about her employer, especially not one as respected and established as Everett Blackwell. The 5 years that stretched between them seemed insignificant compared to the gulf in their circumstances. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when their hands accidentally touched, or the way his rare compliments stayed with her for days afterward. January brought not only bitter cold, but illness as well. Hank came down with a fever that left him bedridden for days, leaving Everett to handle the essential ranch work alone. Nora divided her time between caring for the ailing foreman and taking on additional chores, often working until her fingers were numb and her back ached with fatigue. On the third night of Hank's illness, she was returning from the barn after a final check on the animals when the wind picked up suddenly, howling across the valley with a ferocity that stole her breath. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, disorienting her despite the short distance to the house. She stumbled, losing her footing on a patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. The fall knocked the wind from her lungs, and for a moment, Nora lay stunned, the cold seeping through her clothes with alarming speed. As she struggled to rise, pain shot through her ankle, forcing a cry from her lips that was immediately swallowed by the storm. Nora! Everett's voice cut through the wind, and suddenly he was there, strong arms lifting her effortlessly against his chest. I can walk, she protested weakly. Clearly, he replied, his voice gruff with concern as he carried her toward the house. Inside, he set her gently on the sofa before building up the fire to a roaring blaze. Let me see that ankle, he said, kneeling before her. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined the injury, his large hands warm against her chilled skin. Not broken, he pronounced at last, but a bad sprain. You'll need to stay off it for a few days. I can't, she protested. There's too much work, especially with Hank ill. The work will wait, he said firmly, rising to fetch bandages. As he wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency, Nora became acutely aware of their proximity, of the scent of pine and leather that clung to him, of the careful way he touched her as if she were something precious rather than just an injured employee. When he finished, his hands lingered longer than necessary, one thumb absently stroking the inside of her calf in a way that sent warmth flooding through her despite the chill of the evening. Thank you, she said softly, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and the intensity she found there stole her breath more effectively than the fall had done. For a moment, it seemed he might say something, or perhaps do something, that would irrevocably change the careful balance between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and rose abruptly. You should get some rest. I'll check on Hank. That night, lying in her bed with her elevated ankle and racing thoughts, Nora faced a truth she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with Everett Blackwell. The realization terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. A man like him could have his pick of proper ladies from good families, not a penniless orphan who had begged for work. Yet sometimes, in unguarded moments, she caught glimpses of something in his eyes that gave her hope, foolish as it might be. February arrived with a temporary thaw that brought its own challenges as melting snow turned the ranch into a quagmire of mud and slush. Hank recovered from his illness, and Nora's ankle healed enough for her to resume most duties, though Everett remained uncharacteristically protective, often reassigning her more strenuous tasks without discussion. One afternoon, as they worked together in the barn sorting supplies for the upcoming lambing season, Nora finally addressed what had been growing increasingly apparent. You don't need to treat me like I'm made of glass, she said, hefting a bag of feed to prove her point. I'm fully recovered. Everett paused in his inventory. I'm aware. Then why do you keep taking over my chores? Just yesterday you insisted on carrying water to the barn when I've been doing it daily since I arrived. He was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Perhaps I'm concerned about your well-being. As your employee, she pressed, heart pounding. Is that what you are? He asked quietly, setting down his ledger. Just an employee? The air between them seemed to thicken as he took a step closer. Because I find myself thinking of you as something considerably more, Nora. And that concerns me far more than your ankle. Her breath caught. Why would that concern you? Because, he said, his voice dropping lower as he moved closer still. I promised myself I'd never again care for someone who might leave when winter ends. Who says I would leave? She whispered, scarcely believing her own boldness. His hand rose to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Would you stay then? Not for a job, but for... He hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features. For what, Everett? Her heart thundered in her chest. "For me," he said simply. "For whatever this is between us." The confession hung in the air for one breathless moment before Nora found her courage. "Yes," she said, "I would stay for that." His kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, her hands rising to rest against his chest, the tenderness in his touch nearly undid her. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing long restrained. When they finally parted, his forehead resting against hers, Nora felt as though her world had fundamentally shifted. "We should probably discuss this," she said with a breathless laugh. "Probably," he agreed, a smile transforming his face in ways that made her heart stutter. "Though I'm finding it difficult to think clearly at the moment." A throat clearing from the barn doorway startled them apart. Hank stood there, eyebrow raised but expression more amused than scandalized. "About time," the foreman muttered. "Was wondering how long you two would dance around each other. Now, if you're done making eyes at the girl, Everett, we've got a situation with the north fence." Everett's hand found Nora's, squeezing gently. "We'll continue this conversation later," he promised before reluctantly following his foreman. The promised conversation did indeed continue that evening, after supper dishes had been cleared and Hank had retired to his quarters above the stable. Seated before the fire, Everett took Nora's hand in his thumb tracing patterns across her palm. "I never expected this," he admitted. "When you arrived that day, asking for work, I only meant to offer temporary shelter. I didn't anticipate falling in love," she supplied when he faltered, her boldness surprising even herself. His eyes warmed. "Is that what happened to you as well?" "Yes," she said simply, though I tried very hard not to. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Because you're Everett Blackwell," she said with a small laugh. "Owner of the finest ranch in the territory. And I'm just the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met," he interrupted. "A woman who refused charity when it would have been easier to accept it. Who works harder than men twice her size and never complains. Who brings warmth into a house that hasn't had it since Catherine died." His voice grew softer. "A woman I find myself unable to imagine living without." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know your character, your heart. The rest we can learn together, if you're willing." "And what would people say?" she asked, voicing one of her deepest fears. "The wealthy rancher and the destitute girl who begged for work? They'll say I trapped you, or worse." "Let them talk," he said dismissively. "I stopped caring about town gossip years ago. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." He shifted from his chair to kneel before her, still holding her hand. "I'm not a man given to grand speeches, Nora, but I know my own mind. And my mind, my heart, is decided." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I love you. I want you to stay, not as my employee, but as my wife. If you'll have me." The directness of his proposal stole her breath. "Everett," she began, her voice unsteady. "Are you certain? This is happening so quickly." "I've lived enough years to recognize what matters," he said. "And you, Nora Taylor, matter more than anything has in a very long time." A hint of vulnerability crossed his face. "But if you need time—" "No," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "I don't need time. I know my heart too." The smile that blossomed on her face felt like the first real one in years. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." His answering smile was brilliant as he drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the future they would build together. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The town of Silverton buzzed with gossip when news of the engagement spread. Mrs. Finch, despite her initial disapproval, became an unexpected ally, sharply correcting any insinuations about Nora's character or motivations. "Mr. Blackwell has never been a man to be pushed into anything," she informed the sewing circle with authority. "And Miss Taylor is a good, hard-working girl who deserves her happiness." The wedding took place in early April, just as the first wildflowers began dotting the valley meadows. Nora wore a dress of pale blue silk that Everett had ordered from Denver, insisting it was a proper wedding gift despite her protests about the extravagance. "You begged to work at my ranch for food," he reminded her the night before the wedding as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "And instead, I'm offering you a ring and forever. Let me do this properly." "When you put it that way," she conceded with a smile, leaning against his shoulder. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the town's white-steepled church. Hank served as best man, beaming with uncharacteristic emotion as they exchanged vows. Mrs. Finch dabbed at her eyes throughout the service, later claiming it was merely spring allergies. As Everett slipped the gold band onto her finger, a simple design with small diamonds that had once belonged to his mother, Nora felt the final piece of her new life slide into place. This man, this ranch, this unexpected love story that had begun with desperation and blossomed into something beautiful. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwell," he whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. "And I love you," she replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. *****. 5 years later, Nora stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home, watching as Everett taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to sit astride his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, not yet a year old, babbled happily in Nora's arms, reaching pudgy hands toward her father and brother. The Rocking Bee had prospered under their joint care, expanding its operations and reputation throughout the territory. Nora had proven to have a head for business that complemented Everett's practical ranching knowledge, and together they had built something neither could have accomplished alone. "Mama, look," Thomas called excitedly as the pony took a few careful steps with Everett's steady hand on the bridle. "I see you, my brave boy," she called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. As if sensing her gaze, Everett looked up, his smile as warm and certain as it had been on their wedding day. In that moment, with the spring sun warming her face and her family before her, Nora remembered the desperate young woman who had climbed the hill to this ranch 5 winters ago, seeking only survival. Instead, she had found everything. Later that evening, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars, Everett joined her on the porch swing, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was just thinking how differently things might have turned out," she admitted. "If you'd turned me away that day." "I couldn't have," he said simply. "Something about you. I knew from the first moment that you belonged here." She leaned into his embrace, the solid strength of him as reassuring now as it had been from the beginning. "I'm glad you didn't just offer me a job." His chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Best decision I ever made. Offering you forever instead." As the stars wheeled overhead and the distant howl of a coyote echoed across the valley, Nora closed her eyes in contentment. What had begun as desperation had transformed into the greatest blessing of her life, a love as vast and enduring as the Colorado skies above them, and a forever that continued to unfold with each passing day.